if you want to be an original thinker or a pioneer or, a paradigm buster, you have to be also willing to be lonely, and you have to be willing to take criticism. You can't have thin skin.
Welcome to Back to the Future podcast. My name is Victor Sadia, and I talk with brilliant minds and hearts of people who want to uproot and transform the current health and wellness paradigm. Dr. Nalini Chilkov is a leading authority and pioneer in the field of integrative cancer care. She is the founder of integrativecaranswers.com and author of a best-selling book on cancer. She has more than 30 years of clinical experience combining the best of modern functional medicine with the ancient wisdom of traditional Oriental and natural healing. We began this episode by reflecting on Dr. Chilkov's upbringing in a family that led her to have a heightened sensitivity before she began her journey into healing and medicine. As a doctor who likes to ask the hard questions, Dr. Chilkov advocates for giving individuals the space to navigate life on their own terms and explores the challenges of being an original thinker. Her experiences collaborating with oncologists and her unique approach to cancer care are discussed, highlighting the transformative power of facing one's mortality. Dr. Chilkov underscores the idea that cancer, while accompanied by suffering, can be a gateway to healing and personal growth. Throughout the conversation, she emphasizes the significance of presence, poetry, and breaking habitual thinking for fostering creativity, the best way of being and feeling alive. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have Dr. Nalini Chilkov. Nalini, thank you so much for being here.
I'm delighted.
So I have inside information that you weren't born with the name that you have now. Can you tell me the story about your name?
Absolutely. And I hardly ever get asked that question. So when I was in my teenage years, I became very interested in my own spiritual development and explorations. And I first got very interested in Zen and Buddhism. But when I was in college, I went to a yoga retreat with a teacher called Baba Hari Das, who was part of the Neem Karoli Baba Ram Das community at that time. And after I came back from the retreat, I had dreams about him all the time, that I was trying to reach him across this big crowd of people. And so I moved up to Santa Cruz, California, in Central California, to study with him. And I received my name Nalini from him, which is a spiritual name. And it was sort of, one of those markers of really seriously committing to putting your foot on the path of a spiritual life, a contemplative life. And he was an extraordinary teacher. And I happened to live right up the road from him. And there was a swimming pool at his house. So I would go swimming up there every afternoon when I knew he was out taking a walk. So I would be able to have some time with him as well. And so he gave me my grounding in real formal meditation and yogic practices. And I also thought the name was so beautiful. I love the name Nalini. And so I've kept it my whole adult life. And it's actually a name of Lakshmi, which is a Hindu goddess in that pantheon. And she symbolizes grace and charm and beauty and kind of the bounty of the harvest. And it's a lot to live up to,
It's a lot to live up to, yes. But it's also great to be reminded every day through your name that those values and those concepts are possibilities for us on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's an aspiration to bring the sacred into our everyday lives.
Why do you think, we usually go into spiritual paths after some hard thing happening to us? That's what I usually get.
Yeah.
Was that like that for you, or your approach was rather not from a dark place, let's say?
Well, I think there's always many levels. One of the interesting things I often reflect on is my mother collected Buddhist art. And so we had Kuan Yins and pictures of bodhisattvas and Tibetan lamas in the house I grew up in. And my brother and I both became interested in Buddhism as adults as a consequence. So as I was leaning that way already. And, but also I came from a family that didn't really nourish me. I didn't really have a healthy experience of family. And I was looking for that. And so I found that in some of the Buddhist and yoga communities that I participated in. I really found that feeling of family and belonging, which I needed that. So.
When did you first realize that your infancy wasn't really nourished in that way? Because I'm sure it wasn't a conscious thing when you were a teenager or even when you got into these practices.
Well, actually, I remember my mom was kind of abusive towards me, and she's passed away, so I can speak about that without harming her. I actually think I realized it when I was 3 years old with the way she would interact with me. And I just sort of something in me went, this is not normal. This is not right. Something in me knew that. And so that caused me to pay attention in a very particular way. I think children that grow up in families that have unhealthy patterns become somewhat hypervigilant. And I am a highly sensitive person. And so I learned to pay attention to people and their behavior and their tone of voice and their body language very young.
So I once heard you talk about this. You said, I love complexity and I love
Yes.
people at the edge of a transformation.
Yes.
How what the relationship with your mother really made you realize that though every relationship, every single person is very complex?
I have a pretty voracious appetite for knowledge and wisdom, and I feel like my reward system is impact. Like it's a good day if I make a difference in someone's life. So I found my way into healing and medicine, and it was very suited to my temperament and my interests. And both of my parents had cancer in their 50s. So at that time, I was very new in my practice of medicine. And so I really saw how this very complex syndrome was just treated in such a reductionist fashion. And therefore, outcomes are poor and people suffer a lot and don't have a sense of agency. And that sort of just started to get my attention. And my parents weren't interested in my point of view at all. Like I brought my mom some books that I had bought for a friend of mine who was also suffering from cancer. And I brought them and I showed them to her. And they were just about health and diet and adding that piece. And she threw them at me. And so I put them in the closet and I came back and I got them to give them to somebody else. And she went, where are those books? I was reading them, So that, but both of my parents having cancer at that age really got my attention. So I started to be interested. Do I have a risk? Does my brother have a risk? Or thinking about what's going on in our family. Were we all exposed to some environmental toxins? So what are our genetics? What are risk factors? So I started thinking about that at that time. And I was just in my 30s at that time. And so I really started to seek out mentors because there was no place really to study in a formal way. And so I was very blessed to find some incredible mentors and who were really inspiring role models to me, or different people had a piece. One person would have a piece on the spiritual side of cancer, and another person would have a piece on the herbal medicines. And I just would always just follow that thread and sort of sit at the feet of people who are more experienced and knowledgeable and wise than I was. And I had a writing teacher at the time who was like one of my spiritual mothers. And she asked me this question when I was a new doctor. She said, what do you know about healing that has nothing to do with your training? And I thought, oh my God, that's such a good question. So at that time, I took off my white lab coat, never put it back on again, because I felt it created a separation between me and my patients. But I also, from that question, I started to bring everything in my life into the room with my patient. So there was no separation. And so if the best medicine for that person was a fairy tale and a teaching story, then that was the medicine they needed. If the best medicine for them was just for me to listen open-heartedly and completely and fully, then that was the medicine. And sometimes I thought that my acupuncture needles or my herbs were just kind of props and that the real healing was going on in this other dynamic. So it really freed me up. I was a dancer, I was a mountain climber, I was a yoginian. So I brought everything that I knew. And because I practiced in LA, had a lot of people in the performing arts. And so if I had an actor, I'd give them an exercise to go do and about, being a person who lived their life a completely different way and come back and tell me what they experienced. So I brought everything into my room with my patients after that question. Yeah.
So today that would make more sense than 40 years ago.
Right. That's right.
So
That's right.
how did you know that you were in the right path, or at least, even your parents were, did not agree with
They
that.
really know.
Your colleagues too, probably
Yeah.
your friends, the whole ecosystem of medicine. How did you know that you were doing what you were supposed to be doing and kept at it for so many years?
I don't think you know when you're young, I don't think you know when you're young. I think the 30s are, so I'm 70 now. So the 30s, I think, from my experience, my observation of others in my life, the 30s are a very tumultuous time in most people's lives. They're really a time where you're far enough away from your family of origin to have some perspective, and also then begin to not only work on the shadow material that comes from that, but also define who you are in your own life as an adult on your own terms. But I think the 30s are still a grand experiment in most people's lives. And I was kind of a late bloomer also. I didn't know myself that well. And I think that we have to give a lot of space for the great experiment of life to people, for people to find out what's congruent for them. So I grew up in California culture in the 60s and 70s, and the whole culture was oriented towards finding out what's true for you and what are your illusions and what's true. And although my family was emotionally not very healthy, they were incredibly generous and supportive and open-minded for both myself and my brother to be ourselves. And we're both pretty unusual people. And so I think from at a very young age, where I figured out I could know my truth, that I just kept following that. Like, where does it feel congruent? And I very much sensate body oriented. So I get a feeling in my body when I am in alignment with myself and my path. And I just learned to trust that and pay attention to it. And because of my family's support, I was free to do that, and I think if you want to be an original thinker or a pioneer or, a paradigm buster, you have to be also willing to be lonely, and you have to be willing to take criticism. You can't have thin skin, and if you want to say what you think publicly and create a movement and make a difference. So, I think we all learn all those things the hard way, actually.
Yeah, and I guess that you were being, in a sense, rebellious. You were busting the paradigm in a sense, but you were doing it in a very vulnerable and very charged area of medicine, which is oncology.
Well, but I always had my own clinic. I was never part of an institution. So, and that's because I just don't have the personality to conform. So I couldn't, so I always did my own thing in my own space. So nobody was telling me how much time I could spend with my patients, or, what I had to say to them, or how I had to treat them. So, and as I developed more collaborative relationships, with oncologists, I found that they appreciated that I was not in their institution, because by referring outside of their oncology group, they could give their patient things that never would have been improved if I'd been in their group, And so it turned out to be a good thing for the patient and for the doctors who want to refer to me, so that they didn't have to defend their point of view to their medical group or their medical institution.
Yeah, that's something that, talking about busting paradigms, institutions are probably, institutions will fight to preserve the status quo because that's the only way they know how to interact with it. And it's interesting how being rebellious of your own institution is part of this expansion of possibilities.
Well, also, I think that a lot of it has to do with risk tolerance, because I have very high risk tolerance and some people don't, right? So people who don't want to make any waves, they don't want to break the rules, they don't want anybody to confront them. That's a low risk tolerance person. They're not terribly innovative and creative because they want to belong. And I really I sort of didn't care that much what people's opinions of me were. So I would be outspoken, and I certainly have learned to be a much more diplomatic person as I've gotten older. But I think it's really important to speak your truth and stand in your truth for oneself. But, if you have a mission for the success of your mission also.
Even if your truth is still forming, it's still getting
it's the
defined.
Truth of the moment. Yeah, it's the truth of the moment.
It's the truth of the moment. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about cancer. Obviously, you talk about this every day, but there are so many conversations about cancer that are possible, and many of those conversations are not even in our conscious horizon. That I think in a sense cancer is like an undercurrent of many things in the health and wellness arena, and even in environmental and social healing. And what are those conversations about cancer that you think we need to pull in a bit more into this into this word so charged?
Well, I think we have to look at cancer arising, particularly in modern times, with such a vengeance and proliferating so much, as part of the ecosystem we live in. And so we need to understand what's going on in our own biology, our own biosystem. Why is my biosystem hosting cancer? Why is it an environment that is a happy place for cancer to develop, grow, and progress? And so that's the fundamental point of view of conventional medicine, is reductionist and doesn't consider whole systems. And so that's its gift and its failure at the same time. And so I always say every cancer patient should have a plan for their health and not just a plan for their disease, because the oncology team is disease focused and the word health is not even in the lexicon of an oncology center. But what does the patient want, right? They want their life back. They want a healthy life back. And so I think just to even introduce that word as part of the vision of where we're going is really important to the sense of agency and hope for the patient that it's even possible to be healthy after you go through something so challenging and difficult and often toxic. And so I think my observation is when patients see that we also are planning for their health. And I think long-term about my patients, and it's important somebody does, right? And like I had a patient, she watched her mom die of ovarian cancer. She watched her dad die of pancreatic cancer. Shortly after he passed away, she developed advanced ovarian cancer. So she thought she was going to die too. And so she came to me just in the beginning of her treatment, and she was starting to get emaciated because the chemotherapy for that cancer is aggressive, because the disease is aggressive. So we helped her to gain back her weight and her digestive tract and be able to successfully complete her treatment. So she had the best of both worlds, which is often what gives the best outcome. And then after that, often chemo is given to shrink the tumor, so have a smaller surgery. So then she went into surgery. They couldn't find anything. And that was shocking to them, because usually there's some cancer to be surgically removed. But in fact, she'd had an extraordinary response to her treatment. And then the standard of care would be to do more chemo after that. And she really didn't want to do that. And so at that point, she had microscopic disease. So that's pretty much true of all cancer patients. Even when they're told by their physician that they're in remission or they have no evidence of disease, they still have some microscopic cancer cells, because cancer cells are smart and they learn how to live in a hostile environment, somewhat the same way bacteria learn how to live in the environment of antibiotics and become resistant. So we have to deal with that. So that's another failure of conventional oncology. It does not deal with a low disease burden or a microscopic disease burden, because its tools are too toxic and aggressive. So in our materia medica, we have tools that not only restore health that's been damaged by the treatment and the disease, but we also have tools to take control of the tumor microenvironment, of the biosystem, so it won't host cancer. And all we have to do is just control those microscopic cells, which is a very small job and only requires mild things. But it requires the person to live differently. It requires the person to come into a different relationship with themselves so that they will care for themselves. And that is often the biggest challenge, is that that's where the deepest healing is, in learning how to take care of oneself and not doing it because I give them some external program, which could feel fascist to them because I ask a lot of them, but that internally it's what they wish for themselves. Yeah. So then you have to be congruent with yourself, right? And you have to face yourself. So any disease that causes you to suffer a lot and to face your mortality makes you face your stuff. It makes you face yourself.
Yeah, and I love this idea of the long-term horizon, because I'm thinking now about even if a personal relationship is going through a difficult period, or a business relationship, right? You only think short term that this is going to die, then probably it is going to die in that sense. And the state of the world now is so confusing and so so difficult to describe even, but still the horizon is probably very short term. And I think that looking beyond, an electoral or just a regular time horizon of short term could be it's very needed for our planet and our society to heal.
Well, think about when you commit to a relationship, another person, with love as the ground, and you only wish for their well-being and they only wish for yours. And what if what if the person who has cancer is in that relationship to themselves, right? Because only those kind of relationships make it through really hard times. Right? You intend to work it out with that person, right? You intend to do your work to work it out with that person. But that's what it takes. It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. And I think we don't have enough stories that when we hear about any disease, in this case cancer, but many others in the biological realm or even the socio-environmental realm, stories where these crises, this suffering, these call to actions really get us to a better place, and we are grateful that it happened, but we don't have enough of those.
Well, that's the hero's journey or the heroine's journey, though. You have to face your demons, face your battles, face your obstacles. That's the only way to get to the Holy Grail. And so that's true. And that all spiritual traditions understand that you have to be dismembered in order to awaken. And so you have to break the patterns that don't serve you. And cancer really puts that in your face. If you're doing something in your lifestyle or your relationships or your relationship to self that really does not serve you getting to help, it's in your face. It's in your face.
You know what? I'm thinking about this dismembering. And it's interesting to know that you can't tell the story what will happen afterwards. It's just uncertainty, and it's like when you are grieving, like you cannot domesticate grief. That's something that it will grip you and it can kill you, yes, but still you have in a way to choose to go to that pain, dismember yourself, and then really even lose hope of being remembered.
Well, a lot of people want the self they knew back or the life they knew back and have to grieve the loss of their person and their body as they knew it. And there is grief and loss in going through disfigurement of your body, maybe the loss of a body part, and going through tremendous suffering where your body changes, you lose all your hair, where you can't digest your food anymore, you can't sleep. I mean, people don't recognize themselves, and so it is a perfect gateway of transformation. And so cancer is, it's archetypal kind of journey. Cancer is an opportunity, a gateway in a person's life for healing and transformation. That doesn't mean there's no suffering. It doesn't mean that. Anyone who has faced their own shadow has to have some place inside that says it's worth suffering to get through this and healing this. And so you don't, when you get cancer, you're not choosing that, but after you're diagnosed, you can say, this is going to be a transformational journey for me. This is going to be a healing journey for me. And some people do that and some people don't. And so I am interested in working with people that take that orientation. And also, you have to be really all in. You can't be 99% in. If you want to be outside the bell curve, if you want to be outside the statistical expectations, then you have to be the exceptional patient. And so part of that is characterologic. Some people are all in their lives, or in other parts of their lives, so they know how to do that. And some people just are halfway in every part of their life. And if you're halfway in cancer, you're not going to get the exceptional outcomes. You're not.
Yeah. I hear your words and I'm thinking about a specific individual with cancer, but I'm also thinking about the state of our society today, that we really need to go to a place where we don't know how to be in terms of healing. And I think that's something that it escapes in a sense, because when the hero returns and gives us their story, it seems that it all made sense in retrospect. But when he was living through that, it was
right.
chaos.
That's right. Yeah. So how do you get to wisdom and insight? That's the question, right? It's a very long process, right? It's a very long process. But I will say, and it sounds paradoxical, but many cancer patients with whom I work will often say, number one, I've never been so healthy in my life after they learn how to cause and sustain health. And also they say cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me because of that transformational process.
Yeah, and in that sense, when our hearts, in a sense, are shattered because we receive the news of this disease or whatever that
right.
or something that we lost, actually is not even the diagnosis, but the felt knowledge that yourself will change forever. And sometimes we do need an instruction manual, a fascist program, but we also need beauty. Like, in a sense, we need be close to that place where our sorrow is part of it. It's not something that it's like an external thing that came, or an accident, or something that it only happened to me. But something that it is the journey. Sorrow is the journey, in a sense.
Well, also, cancer doesn't just happen to the patient. The cancer diagnosis and the experience and the journey that person is going through happens to everybody that's close to them. So everyone in their close circle of loved ones and extended family and community is impacted by their cancer and their cancer journey. And so, cancer patients learn quickly which friends and family members can be with them with what's really happening, and which people just can't. They people who love them, but they cannot be in that reality with them because of their own stuff. And it becomes very clear who those people are as well.
You remember when we were sitting side by side last month? We were hearing one of the talks of a person who had a cancer experience, and when her conference ended, I just started crying, really sobbing, and you were by my side. And you asked me, why or what? And I said, her story, I was part of it, and she changed my whole life because through her, I became one of the person who had the possibility of being with a cancer patient with the entirety of themselves. Because I was ready to be, as you said at the beginning, my entire self is in this room. And I think that's one of the greatest gift I have received, which required my own courage to confront something that I didn't have any answers to, but still I could be there just as a person. With my whole person, and at the same time I was given this gift because this person was open enough to allow for my presence to be when she needed also someone strong, and I wasn't strong, but I was there.
Well, you know what, real presence is a rare thing in our culture. Real presence, that's a great gift to bring someone.
It is the gift.
The gift. Yeah. I think, it made me think about, I like things that make me be fully present, like I like to hike on a really narrow trail on a really high altitude, or work in an emergency room, or sit in a room with a cancer patient, because you have to be fully present, and bring all your attention and resources and presence to that moment. And I like things like that.
You were talking about bringing the sacred to our everyday lives, and in that moment of real presence, like we are feeling now through I don't know, we are 2,000 miles apart and we are present. And I'm thinking about gifts, and you gave me a book when we were driving to the Congress, and then you sent me some books over Amazon. And I said, I don't like receiving a lot of gifts, but books I love to receive. And in a sense, when you give a book, you're giving, in a sense, the presence of the author, the presence of the words, and the presence of the person who's giving you the gift. And I think it's so nice to also have ways of showing that presence, even if we are not present, physically.
Yes.
What do you like to receive as presents?
My way of feeling most loved is to spend time with people. I like to be with people. I grew up with a lot of stuff, and so I don't have any confusion about, I know things are not love. I know that. But what I always longed for as a child, and what makes me feel the most love, is when someone spends time with me.
Yeah, I think that's
it's my main thing. And at my stage of life, I don't need any more stuff. I have everything I need in terms of stuff. So I really treasure, I think when you give someone your time and your attention, that's a very precious thing.
Yeah, invaluable in a sense. Yeah. So let's talk about poetry.
Okay.
We're always talking about poetry. We're always trying to be a poem, in a sense, probably not being poets, but poems. What does poetry mean to you? And I know in January you'll be going to a retreat with one great poet, David White. What's poetry for you, and how can you describe your relationship with it throughout the years?
Well, I'm going to answer your question, but I'm also going to tell you that I prescribe poetry to my patients, and I'm going to tell you what I prescribe to them. So I like poetry because it takes you out of your linear mind. And for those of us who are overeducated, we need an escape route to get out of our linear mind. So I like it because of that. I like it because it causes you to get down to the pith and the essence of something. And I like it because I really feel poetry is meant to be spoken and heard. And so then it's embodied also. It's embodied and it has a breath and a rhythm and a sound to it. And I like all those things about it. But there is a practice in Zen monasteries with the haiku form, which is a very strict form. And I actually like that form a lot as well because it governs the number of syllables and lines, and it's only a 3-line poem. And so it forces you, what is it you want to say? What is it you want to say? And in traditional haiku, you have to put a nature metaphor in. And I think nature's been my greatest teacher. So I like that about the haiku form. But I also like the rules of it because I'm very much into the path of freedom through discipline. And so there's something liberating about mastering that form. When you write enough poems, you get a few good ones, right? So, I'll just write furiously and then a few of them will be good. But there's this practice in Zen monasteries where at the end of the day, you reflect on your day and you write a poem that captures the essence of your day. So for my patients who are plagued by overthinking or too many emotions arising, too many thoughts arising, who have sleep problems, who are anxious and worriers and don't know how to disengage, I often give them this practice to do. And I tell them the poems don't even have to be good. It's the process I want you to engage in, and get a little book and write them, and you don't have to read them or show them to anybody. I said, but at the end of the year, you might have a few really great poems, And so it's a process that takes you out of ordinary mind.
I love how you talk about poetry. And these.
So you answer that question. You answer the question you just asked me.
Thank you. Yes. So basically, when you say poetry is like an embodied thing, I just decided to publish my third book, collecting a few essays I've written over the last 4 years, which I am reading out loud every time I publish it. And the title of the book will be Letters of Flesh, Letras de Carne. Because in a sense, they go out of being flesh, they go into the wind, into the orality, but then they embody the flesh even more. And for example, in these conversations of the podcast, I'm gravitating more and more not towards people who are very mental and have a lot of intellectual, a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of complex thinking, but also this embodied felt experience of what it means to be engaged with that information, and what does that mean, and how does that feel in a process of embodied experience. And it's beautiful, because even healing modalities are evolving toward that, like trauma modalities to heal from trauma. They're post-verbal. They're from the body. They are singing and hugging and wailing and many others. And I think that's so powerful as a possibility, because in my life, I've always been very intellectual. And this poetry of the flesh, it feels so right. It feels, yeah.
Well, and the embodiment of you reading your own work, that can take you out of your head and your intellect also.
And why do you like these retreats to write? And how a writing retreat can be parallel to a healing retreat, where we are seeing a lot of retreats to heal and to work on trauma and all those things. How are they very similar or not?
Well, I got interested and involved in meditation very young, as a teenager in high school. And therefore, I was introduced to this idea of going on retreats. And in the most strict retreats, you really turn away completely from the world. And that is what allows you to get out of your habitual patterns. And so I think often it's just the away factor that, allows you to step out of your habitual. But that's where there's liberation, is when you are freed of your habitual perceptions and cognitions and ways of being. that's where there is some liberation from the small self, and where there's a little room for something else. And it takes a lot of practice, it does. And so I've done lots and lots of meditation retreats, and I really like them because I'm a busy person. And so it gives me structure. I'm a person who likes structure. Some people just hate it, but I really feel that it serves me well. And I don't like really heavy, strict, if your leg hurts, you should be able to move your leg if you're sitting in meditation. But, some traditions don't allow that. So, but I have a history of going on retreat, and whether that's for my own internal work or for creative, I used to go to a lot of dance retreats, or I'd consider my mountain climbing expeditions retreats from my everyday ordinary life. There's something about stepping outside of your ordinary habitual way of being. And, His Holiness Dalai Lama says the whole point of practice is stop being habitual. So, that you to break that. And so I think that's at the core of the question you asked.
Yes, and I do believe that we should also prescribe more retreats to patients in general, just because we are allowing exactly that, which is so involved with their identity on the autopilot that we all live in.
Well, and if you want to be creative and original, you have to step out of your ordinary and habitual ways of thinking and doing things to come up with, leave some space for something new to arise,
There's one more question I want to ask regarding cancer, because I've been thinking a lot about nurses and how nurses are so important walking beside patients in a way that not even the family or the physician can. What is the magic of nurses, and how is their philosophy so entwined with their practice, and at the same time so needed and so effective in a sense while walking beside these patients?
I think that oncology nurses are the most awesome human beings. Oncology nurses, hospice nurses. You have to have a high level of medical skill to deal with seriously ill patients, number one. So it's a certain kind of person, and it requires a certain kind of paying attention when you have a really seriously ill patient, because patients aren't good at reporting. So you have to be a good observer and elicit information. So it requires relational skills. And it also, my experience of nurses that go into oncology and palliative care and hospice nursing, also their reward system is impact. And they also like intensity, and they like to be like, I love those edges where life is so rich, it's so rich, and it's just so full in those moments. Even if it's with somebody who's dying, it's so cracked open and so rich and so multi-dimensional, and there's a lot of room and possibility for all kinds of human growth and expression, and at the end of life, patients kind of let their social conditioning go and really say what they think and feel, and it's just so rich. But these are people who can also be with suffering, be with somebody who's terrified, be with someone who's in incredible pain, be with someone who's suffering loss, be with someone who's facing death. It's an unusual kind of person. And I would say, with the hands-on in the trenches, if they're vomiting or they just shit all over themselves, they're also there for that. And they're just extraordinary human beings. And that's a certain kind of presence. If we go back, it is it's a situation where you're so fully alive. You're so fully alive, and all the resources you have can be brought to that moment. And I think they're just amazing people. I always tell my patients, your oncologist isn't your main point person. Your oncology nurse is your main point person and your ally. And that's the person you need to know who that is and how to get in touch with them. That's what
Beautiful.
I tell my patients. Yeah.
You know, Joseph Campbell said, he said that he said, I don't think people are looking for the reason of being alive, but rather for a feeling of being alive.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Uh-huh.
and in a sense, I get this through my research in cancer. Like, you know, you might be terrified or you might be whatever, but you feel present, you feel alive, you feel here, you feel
Yes.
complex, you feel
Yes.
part of
Yes.
something that is very big.
Yes.
It's so
Yes.
big that it even devours who you are, and at the same time you're still here. And I
Well,
think, yeah,
not everybody can do that though. I mean, some people dissociate and then they don't get to have that experience.
yeah. Yeah, that's you know, cancer is so close to death, and that's the reason why it's so close to life.
That's right.
And
That's right.
I'm really happy to know you appreciate your not only your work and your bravery in your work, but just allowing yourself to evolve as a person through your work and healing through your work. And that's something that I would love to see more health professionals do, like receiving also and not only trying to give and give and give.
Well, patients, of course, feel that I have had a big impact on their life, but they have no idea the impact they have on me, how I am transformed by accompanying them on their journey, by being allowed, permitted, honored to accompany them on their journey. They have no idea. That's why I have no intention of retiring, because I grow so much. I grow so much, and I feel enlivened by those relationships.
Well, Nalini, thank you so much. I don't know if you would like to add anything else to this conversation. I really appreciate your time and your presence.
It was such a rich conversation, Victor. Thank you so much. I sort of don't want it to end, so let's do it again.
Yes, we will. I will read a short poem by Mary Oliver in honor of Mary and in honor of poetry and in honor of you. So thank you so much for being here,
Thank
and
you.
we
Thank
will
you.
continue being here. It's called I Go Down to the Shore. I go down to the shore in the morning, and depending on the hour, the waves are rolling in or moving out. And I say, oh, I am miserable. What shall I do? And the sea says in its lovely voice, excuse me, I have work to do. Thank you so much, Nalini.
Thank you.
Talk soon.